Hello everyone, my name's Dane. In this video we're going to have a look at the concept of a knowledge-first architecture and how it can help streamline our data to decision-making processes. So what is a knowledge-first architecture and how is it different from the more typical needs-first architecture? That's a great question. Let's start with a needs-first architecture. If your organization's often reacting to problems or needs when it comes to asset management initiatives, for example, we need a new capital planning tool, or we need to get better at maintaining our assets, then your resultant data and IT architectures are most likely needs first. This means that your organization typically starts with the problem, shown on the right, then it chooses or develops a solution to solve the problem, and only then it goes looking for the data, inputs, and knowledge required to feed that new solution. This approach usually results in siloed functions and work streams, and it often uses many different software tools to solve the organization's many different problems. Sometimes you can even work back to the data and inputs and realize that you can't actually feed the solution the inputs it needs to deliver value. Knowledge-first architectures, on the other hand, come at it from the other direction. You can think of it as a bottom-up approach to solving problems. And as a result, it's often very heavy on data and the details. Firstly, it starts with the question, what assets do we have? Then it asks, what do we know about them? Or what's our understanding of them? And only after we've got a good grasp of these two questions do we look at what do we want to know in order to solve our various business problems. So the main difference between a knowledge-first architecture and a needs-first architecture is the establishment of a knowledge base or current understanding of the assets up front. Having a knowledge-first architecture means that all different parts of the organization, like capital teams, planning teams, financial risk management, operations and maintenance, they can all draw from this upfront knowledge base that contains the organization's latest thinking. So let's have a look at an example from a water utility. In this architecture you see here, we'll start on the left, the first layer, which is represented by your existing systems, your CMMS system, your GIS system, your data lakes, sources of information that we can draw from to feed the processes to the right. Now, these systems typically store what we call level 1 information, which is what's actually out there, what are the characteristics of the assets that you have, and the environments that they're in, and so on. But then we use this information as an input to the next layer, which is the asset model layer. This layer contains level 2 and level 3 information, causal relationships between things like environment and performance and operating context. Now this is where the knowledge comes in, because the types of information contained in this layer are typically derived from experience, from subject matter expertise opinion, from white papers, from the general principles of engineering and science. Okay, so once we combine our level 1 information and overlay on top of that our current understanding of the asset, or the level 2 information here, we can start to understand the specific assets that we have out in the field, which brings us to this layer 3, the field asset representation. And so what we're doing here is essentially deriving an individual representation of every single one of our assets that we have out in the field, that's contextualized to its environment, its operational context, its conditional information, its costs, and a bunch of other different things that you've defined in the layer 2 asset model. From there, we can start to get a bit of a picture around the current condition and what it's likely to do in future years in terms of probabilities of failure and projections in terms of performance. Now, this field asset layer can be thought of as an asset hierarchy, where every single one of your assets in your hierarchy have a corresponding representation here in this field assets layer. Now that we have this representation of field assets that's informed by our subject matter experts' opinion and thinking, and our organization's understanding of those assets, We can now move to the next layer, layer 4. We call this solvers, but another way to think of that is you can think of them as use cases. What do we want to know about these assets? And what do we want to do with that information? And there are pretty much unlimited use cases for this type of information, from generating capital plans to understand and analyzing maintenance strategy, operational strategy, making trade-offs, running scenarios, implementation of business logic, anything that you can articulate and put into some sort of method can be used here in this solvers layer. The solvers can be unique to a particular asset class, multiple asset classes, or used across the entire organization. They can be very simple executions of logic through to condition-based approaches, risk-based approaches, or value-based approaches. Even advanced optimization techniques fit into this place here. The outputs of the solvers we store in scenarios. The scenarios are the intended answer to the business problem that we have, and these answers are then pushed to an output layer where they're turned into documents, dashboards, integrations to other systems, loaders, etc. So in summary, if you use a needs-first architecture and you come at it from the right side here, then what you end up with usually is a software tool that implements one workflow of this process here, including the methodology that they're using to solve for that particular problem, and you're stuck with the data structures they require for the upfront asset information and asset data portions. And because we have many different types of problems, we end up with many different software solutions. Knowledge-first architecture, on the other hand, seeks to establish a knowledge base here in layers 2 and layers 3, which we can draw from across various parts of the business to answer whatever questions we want in a way that is scalable, that can be improved over time as our thinking around business process changes and as our thinking around our assets change. That's it for this video. If you got something out of it, please smash the like button. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below and I'll get back to you. See you in the next one.